Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for stopping by the Cooper Surgical booth today. Hope you're having a great meeting. My name is Danielle Sheehan, and I'm an embryologist and clinical application scientist with Donor Egg Bank, the customer success team. So we thought we'd have a fun time today getting to talk about a little bit more of the embryologist experience when it comes to vitrification and thawing, particularly of oocytes. And I'll start by just introducing myself a little bit more. I've been an embryologist for 22 years, and myself and my colleague Samantha Collins are both embryologists that bring over 30 years combined of embryology hands-on experience to the Donor Egg Bank team. And what we spend a lot of our time doing is going out to labs on both the vit and the thaw side that partner with us and do some hands-on training, do some kind of really dig deep to see how we can help the outcomes for your patients. In my life as an embryologist in the Boston area, I worked in clinics that froze for a couple of different egg banks, so I'm really excited to bring that long-term hands-on experience that I have to Donor Egg Bank USA. So we're going to start just briefly with vitrification principles and just how we should, as embryologists, understand them at a level that we can at least know what we're expected to see under the microscope. And the author, Brené Brown, talks about what does done look like, or paint done for me. So I thought we'd start with warming, because warming will tell us the success of our outcome. And if we then circle back to vit, sometimes it's easier to start at the end and figure out what can we do to get a successful outcome. So we'll circle back to some vit tips that can help us really lead to a successful warming. And then finally, we will talk about why Donor Egg Bank should be the choice for your patients and how we're here to help make that a successful outcome for them. We're the premier Donor Egg Bank. We've been an industry leader since 2012 when the experimental label was lifted on egg freezing. Okay, so my colleague Sam, who's a lot younger than me, helped me kind of figure out the best way to talk about vitrification principles in a friendly way. So she made this oocyte, and I'm of the age group where I remember slow freezing and balancing sucrose on a Mettler balance and seeding to start the ice crystal formation to avoid this chance of ice formation that can really lead to poor outcomes and damage the oocyte. But today we're using vitrification, and we have these high concentrations of cryoprotectants. And I think sometimes when we're working as embryologists or training our embryologists, it's very easy to follow a protocol and get in the habit of just following the protocol and going by the timers and really not taking a step back to remember the science. So the reason why we're going to start here is just to talk about imagining this oocyte being, in whatever protocol you're using, exposed to cryoprotectants. And what's happening? Well, we know that oocyte's the biggest cell in the body. We have all this water to deal with. We want to avoid the ice crystal formations. And what the cryoprotectants are doing is they're working together, both the intracellular and the extracellular cryoprotectants are working together to help get that water out and replace it so that we can hopefully reduce the risk of damage during the process. So our permeating cryoprotectants can actually cross the membrane. So if you think about the cells sitting in the media, you're going to actually see it with your eyes if you're staring at it under the scope, kind of start to shrink. What's happening? Why is that happening? Well, the water's rushing out of the cell. And the extracellular cryoprotectants, our sugars and our protein, are really help getting that last bit of water out. And then our permeating cryoprotectants are going to go in. And when that happens, you'll start to see your oocyte re-expand. And this is all normal. And the exact same thing happens on the other end during warming. We'll come back to that. So when we talk about warming, here comes our device, and we're going to plunge it. And this step is very important. We have to worry about temperature, we have to worry about speed, but sometimes at the bench, some things can happen. Like not every device is going to be the same. So we thought we'd take you through some what would you do in this case scenarios and talk about how you might troubleshoot this. So this has happened to me several times, maybe it's happened to you, but you plunge your device and let's say the oocytes are sticking on for an extended period of time and you're tempted to maybe start to get nervous and remove them with a pipette perhaps, or maybe you're a fan of doing nothing and just waiting for them to release on their own. Maybe you like to gently shake the device and try to coax the oocytes off a little more gently. Anybody want to call out a number when you do? Jay? 3. That's also what I would recommend. So when you are tempted to remove those oocytes with a pipette manually, you can really cause damage to the lemma, and a drenchular approach might be more appropriate. I've been tempted to do number 2 many times and just let them come off on their own and worry a little bit less about the time of the exposure in the TS, but you do have to think about the fact that as soon as you plunge, those oocytes are being exposed to that media all that time, so maybe some troubleshooting is warranted. So if you gently shake the device, that can help release the oocytes. So I recommend never really, unless you absolutely have to go at them with a pipette. You could maybe swirl media on top. That might be a gentler approach too. So on the other side, but similar to that, what happens when you plunge your device and you say, there's no oocytes on this device? What do? You could be tempted to say, well, there was a problem at freezing, the eggs were never there. Go get your manager, file a complaint, or call up the donor bank and say, this device had no eggs on it, our patient paid for 6, we only got. So I think the first thing to remember with any time you're working with oocytes is to take a deep breath and just relax. Most of the times those eggs are there. You can think back to your plunge step, and if you saw bubbles come off, which sometimes happen, a bubble could adhere to the oocyte and it will then go floating right up to the top of the meniscus of whatever media dish you're working with. And that might mean that you want to adjust your scope and kind of look in a different plane. I think the best thing is to not take your device out of that plunge step until you've located your oocytes. Keep it submerged, use it as a tool to help you kind of move that media around gently. Oftentimes you might see the oocyte go by and find it that way. Sometimes when there's a heavier hand on the loading during vid, you can end up with a little bit more media on the device. And so when you plunge it, those oocytes come off before your eyes can ever see them. And I think that's what happens a lot of the times when people can't find them. So remembering back to that purple oocyte at the beginning, that now we're in a situation where the oocytes actually do purposely get almost invisible for a period of time. So if you didn't see them when you plunge and they go through that transition of what a lot of us call ghosting, that's that period of time before the water is rushing back into the cell, the cryoprotectors are going out, and they almost look degenerated. They don't look good, and sometimes you don't see them at all. So remain calm. I know you set your timer, and the timer could be going off, but it's more important to just stay calm and try to locate the eggs. Most of the time they're there. And my favorite recommendation is to ask for help. Sometimes when things are going not according to plan, our bodies can react and we can get that increased heart rate, we're nervous. And if you have folks in your lab that have experience with oocytes, especially when you're working with oocytes, they're almost always going to feel very precious. Maybe they're eggs that somebody froze for themselves at a younger age and now they're finally coming back to use them, or maybe it's after cancer treatment, they're coming back to use them, or in many cases it's a donor recipient who spent a lot of money. So remain calm, ask for help. It's great to even let your colleague know, I'm going to be doing this thaw this time. Maybe you're in there making plates or data entry or doing something that is not super time intensive, and once they got their oil on, they can come over and help you. That happens to all of us. Doesn't have anything to do with your experience level. Sometimes you just don't see them, and a second set of eyes can really help. Okay, this is my favorite scenario to talk about. So the timer is going off, whatever, it's usually a minute in a lot of protocols after that punch step, and your eggs aren't looking good. You might even think they're like maybe degenerated, but remember that ghosting that I talked about. So that every egg is different, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer for them to re-equilibrate. So it's really nice to teach your embryologists the science behind what's happening and not to worry so much about the timer. Now, I'm not suggesting that we don't set our timers. I know we have to adhere to protocols, but this is a good time to take a step back to the science and to put our science brains on and understand what's going on and realize that you don't have to panic. You actually do have more time than you think. And there are even some studies that suggest that a bit longer TS exposure actually leads to better outcomes. So make a qualitative assessment of the eggs. Let them tell you when they're ready to go to the dilution step. And if it's getting a little past whatever that initial timer is, it might not be as big of a problem as we think. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the vitrification and see if there's anything that we can do to help make the most successful outcome that we can. And when we paint done, like Renee says, what does success look like? Well, obviously survival is one of them, but I'm gonna argue that it's not the only thing that we should be looking for. We're gonna use the Goldilocks analogy to talk about the next bit. So here we have Goldie. I think she's drinking her porridge that's just the right temperature, and the porridge on the right is too hot, and one on the left, she's left behind, it's too cold. So let's attribute this to the amount of media that we load when we vitrify oocytes. When we load too much media, sometimes it can seem like at warming that we're looking for something, a tiny speck of something in the ocean. And I took this picture of my cousin surfing, but you can't see him because he's this tiny little speck somewhere. And it can feel like that sometimes when you are warming oocytes that have had a lot of media left on the device and they've disappeared on you. The same respect, and we were kind of taught this when we first started doing egg vit. We thought we had to stake off as much media as possible, and we're kind of moving away from that. But in both of these cases, you could get survival. They could be fine, and I'm not suggesting that, but what I'm saying is that if we can sort of come together as a group in our labs when we're freezing and kind of figure out what is the just right amount for us and look at adherence times, we probably will end up with more success, and at least it would be a more pleasant experience at warming if we could get a more uniform amount of media on those straws than we can really expect. So I like when it's like 5 seconds or 3 seconds, so I have enough time to see the eggs and I don't have to scrape them off or shake them too hard, to shake them around too much. So this is something that you can do in your lab without even really actual mature or even oocytes that are alive. You can use discard material because you're just kind of practicing how much media you want to load, and have those same people that practice the vit do their own warming so they can experience what it's like and how long these eggs are sticking to the device. Same Goldilocks when it comes to where we're placing these oocytes. So the eggs are going to drop in last so you can see them. But in this situation at plunge, the eggs actually haven't been submerged in the media yet. They're too high up. And hopefully the person at warming will notice that and kind of flatten out the device so they can get a coverage. But, the eggs will probably survive. But if we can get them to a place that's just right, we won't have to worry about that. So we can practice where we're placing the oocytes on the device. In this case, many devices have a dark mark at the end. So if you can put the oocytes on the mark or next to the mark, that can also obscure the vision of the person thawing. So it's nice to practice placement of the device as well. And again, this all can be done without mature eggs. What do we do when it doesn't go just right? Sometimes we have a cohort of oocytes and we're loading, we're doing the best we can, we're in a rhythm, and then suddenly you've placed oocytes on the device in a place you preferentially wouldn't, or you've loaded a little bit more media than you like. What should you do? And I'm going to argue that as long as you see your oocytes on the device, it's probably best to just plunge and move on. If you want, you can make notes, and you can say something like straw number 6, high on the device. So the person warming will be aware of that and can prepare for that. Because what happens if we start repipetting or drawing off too much media is that we might run the risk of picking the egg back up, losing it, and now it's been exposed to the VS for an extended period of time. And then you also have to start thinking about the other oocytes in that round that have been sitting in the ES for too long. When you start having to troubleshoot too much, those are being exposed to the ES for a long period of time. So, just getting your head back in the game, moving on from it, and starting again is probably the best way to go. So just recap some of the things that can get us that Goldilocks happily ever after load just right. Of course, technical best practices, having your liquid nitrogen as close as possible to your bench for a short working distance. You want to definitely adhere to protocol. And how about training? Like, who is going to be performing the oocyte bits in your clinic? Does it necessarily have to be everybody? Probably not. This is a very high-end technique. It's one of the most time-sensitive things that we do. It's something that not necessarily every single person has to learn, but at the same respect, you do want to have enough people that are trained that you can get into a rhythm and a cadence where people are not feeling overwhelmed by having to do it too often. But you also want to look at how many patients you have autologous for freezing, and if you're freezing for donors, so that you can make sure that they're doing it often enough, because it's something that you want to repeat a lot. This is not a technique that you want to be doing once a quarter or twice a year. This is something you really need to be doing more often. And you can have your technicians split cases in order to get them more exposure. And you can have them practice, like I said, on things that are not even necessarily oocytes, and you can work on adherence times and placement. One of the drawbacks about autologous egg freezing is a lot of times we don't have access to our own data in a good amount of time. It's because they come in to freeze and they might not ever come back, or it takes a long time for them to come back and use it. So this is a situation where doing those practices and looking at success in other areas besides just survival is really important. But one of the advantages that Donor Egg Bank USA, of course, has is that we've been freezing oocytes for many years, since 2012. So we have a lot of data to go back and look at. And we're really proud of our data. We love data. That's one of the things that Samantha and I spend a lot of our time doing in our role, is looking at all the data that we have and how we can help our clinics improve their outcomes as much as possible. And it also, of course, helps us kind of QC our donors and make sure that the product we're putting out there is as good as it can be. So I just want to highlight the embryology dashboard that we have at Donor Egg Bank USA, because I think it sets us apart from other banks. You can actually, any single person that thaws a Donor Egg Bank USA cohort can get onto the cycle report, get a login, and all of the donors that you do in your clinic over time, you can look at for all of these KPIs. So this is pretend data, of course, but let's say this is David here. He has done 31 thaws and has 92% survival. We can look at his last rate preferred and lot, and we understand that a lot of different factors go into these rates, but it's just kind of nice. And you can look at your entire clinic's average against the DEB USA network average and see where you're landing, and then you can make decisions. You can also export all of this data to Excel and work with it as you want in your own clinic to figure out how it will work best for you. And at the same respect, we have this excellent recipient cycle outcome data audit tool. So let's say you have a nurse, third-party nurse in your program, or someone else that's really interested in outcomes overall. They can get in and make their own reportable chart and drag and drop these columns to whatever the parameters are that they're looking for, and view the trends over time. So you can look at things like all of the recipients that you have, their HCG levels, how you can track your biochemical rate, all these things. And I think I already mentioned this, but that can also be exported to Excel and worked with as you wish. And my entire team is well versed in doing this, and we're available. So you can email us, we can schedule a call, we can talk you through it. It's a bit of a new feature for Donor Egg Bank USA. We've always had the data, but this report itself has only been around for a little over a year. So not a lot of people might know about it. So we can get the word out to make sure you understand that it's there for you. And one of the other things WSA loves to do, no pun intended, is every year we have Love Awards where we look at our data and we like to reward and recognize the top performers in both the vid and the thaw side. So this is a list of our USA 2023 award winners. We're super proud of them, and we're so happy to partner with them. We would like to see your name up here in 2024. So that means you have to steer your patients towards Donor Egg Bank USA. Reach out to Samantha and myself for any questions that you have, but embryology related. And that's it.